talking about, well, the people just like me, all the old players of World of Warcraft. And today it's a bit of a diverse topic to talk about, because I don't want to just talk about, what do people of an older generation of WoW versus a newer generation of WoW currently do. I would say for the most part, most people who play WoW nowadays are in their mid-20s, mid-30s for the most part. So it's not like we're hitting a super young crowd here. But the discussion point that kind of brought up this idea was, this one actually, which was, does anyone wish they had some form of more difficult dungeons, but they weren't timed like Mythic Plus? I love the idea of difficult 5-mans, but I truly cannot stand the idea of it all being timed. I get why others like it, but it's just not how I like to play. And it kind of frustrates me that the only route for playing difficult 5-mans is them being timed. I get that it's not likely to happen, just ranting. So the reason why I thought about this being connected to older players is that I think there's a number of people who maybe can't time keys or struggle to time keys as they get to a little bit of a higher level. And I think while Mythic Plus content, I mean, it's stuff that's like 40 minutes or less, it's not super long content. I think people don't like the idea of it being like consuming, in the sense that like you could do a mythic and then fail to time the key, and then it's sort of a waste of your time. So people don't like the idea of that. They much rather, I guess, the idea is that maybe bang their head against a wall, as far as, make the content harder and harder until you can't beat it. So what are my thoughts on this personally? I think that if you make harder content that's not timed, I think there's ways that you can make it interesting. And the perfect example actually came up in a comment like this, basically, that says that love the idea of mega dungeons released every expansion. It might be my favorite piece of content they do, but it's not nearly as replayable as Mythic Plus. And looking into some of the Mythic dungeons, it's of course all inclusive, but thinking of dungeons like Blackrock Depths, Zul'Gurub, Karazhan, Mechagon, and then Tazavesh, and then Dawn of the Infinite as well, as mentioned. Basically, your dungeon content that, for the most part, has the potential, I guess is the idea, that has the potential of being split up into multiple mythics. I mean, your mythics usually include bosses, like 4 bosses. But I mean, if you think about BRD, for example, BRD just has boss after boss after boss. So, I mean, mega dungeons to me, I think, are a thing of nostalgia, but I don't know if they would work in something nowadays. I mean, it's something that I wish could be like reapproached and done some more. I think it was always interesting to do those bosses because there was always something for everybody in those dungeons. But at a certain point, I mean, when we got to readdress BRD in classic WoW, it just became sort of the same degenerate mentality where you kind of hop into the dungeon, go for the boss you go into, and then once you get past the boss that you're trying to get, you leave the group. So a lot of times it felt like that once people didn't get the piece of loot they were getting, they would leave and they wouldn't really do that dungeon anymore. Like it just became this thing of like, well, there's this massive dungeon that you never get to experience the full range of bosses because nobody's willing to do them all, because nobody needs to do them all. And you could say like, well, now it's different. You could always make loot more, I guess, linear. Like the later you go, like the more useful pieces you find in there. But for the most part, it's the personal loot system. So I mean, things are pretty set in stone. And I mean, I've already heard of people being in mythics and dropping the moment they don't get the piece from the boss that they need specifically. So I don't know if mega dungeons are the solution. I just wish they were, because mega dungeons, to me, they feel they have this certain nostalgic feel, and for this older players, I think that it's really interesting to see dungeons that are fully fleshed out to feel like an actual dungeon. I mean, it's almost like, to me, that mythics don't feel like mythics anymore, because the only thing mythic about them is people's attitudes towards them, I guess. So I mean, I think that the last point they make makes sense, where it says maybe you'd say that you could focus on bosses themselves, forget about the benefit the timer has for trash, and just make it interesting mechanical bosses that take multiple attempts at down. You gain more mechanics on higher difficulties to tackle. Well, you've made raids again. Basically like that mythics leading into raids. So like the more difficult you make the bosses and focus on bossing, the more it just becomes basically a raid. I think that this comes from maybe a mentality of treating dungeons like Diablo, where the trash gets harder. But I don't even think dungeons focus on really trash anymore. I mean, like there used to be situations where there was difficult trash pulls that you would CC and do those kind of things, but I don't think that's really the methodology of nowadays. I mean, the most CC I ever see is maybe in Mist the Tyrna Scythe. That's one mob. You guys know the one mob that you CC. So, but other than that, I mean that and the interrupts, but nowadays that just doesn't really exist. So I don't feel like, as much as mega dungeons to me do a few great things. Let's talk about the positives. They do things like they improve the social aspect because you're trying to figure out strategies. You don't have a timer. You can focus more on defeating difficult things instead of just disbanding the moment things go wrong. And then third, I think that having those mega dungeons help to immerse you into the content versus taking you out of it the moment you like started getting comfortable in a group. I feel like groups, you know, I mean, if a group goes well, you know, you're clearing in such a short amount of time that you don't really even really get to know people, unless it's just it goes really well and you go, hey, like add me for later, you know. That's the sad part. So and then continuing on to that argument, you know, the second post is basically, are older players still around? As the 20th anniversary gets close and I start pushing 50, I'm curious how many older players are still around. This game has been around 20 years, started playing shortly after launch. I've seen friends guilds come and go. I leave, come back myself. I play solo now, but I'm curious about the 40 plus crowd who play this game and what they spend their time doing. We form up guilds, we recruit young people, and then tell them about how rotary phones worked. 55 years old here, my original guild gradually withered, but a couple of people from it still play. And yeah, it's definitely a bummer as you hear some of them passing. For me, I found a new guild of random people who are, near as I can tell, largely in their 30s, but there's also a fair number of us old players from 40s to 50s. I play solo questing, and like this kind of the thing that keeps on repeating is like basically I'm doing the lowest version of content that I want to do currently in the game, and I'm okay with that. And I think that's for a lot of continued veteran players. I think that's what older players do. I think when it comes to Mythic Plus and like these problems, you know, about timing dungeons, to me these ideas are very connected, because I think that there's a group of people who don't feel like timing content but still want to do stuff that's challenging. And I think that's why things like delves were created. And a lot of people mention that, you know, like this is the reason why delves exist and why their purpose. But a lot of people, you know, I think that play this game don't have a long-term route where they're able to sort of stay in that area of content. Often you'll find that people who are doing the delve content are trying to do mythics, but then they get discouraged the moment that timers become too stressful, or they start doing raiding, but the moment that it like the pug works or doesn't work, you know, they're like, well, because, you know, I mean, that's as far as I go. So I think people are okay with that in a way, because one, you know, as time progresses, new content comes out and old gear, old item levels become irrelevant anyways. And I think that a lot of times you are able to, or WoW development has gone into this corner of making content that allows people to stay in their certain sect of the game and not have to interact with others. Now, what is my proposed solution, all this doom and gloom of these things happening? To be honest, I think it's okay for people to be in their certain areas of the game. I think what people are missing when they're saying this kind of stuff about mythic dungeons, timers, and like their issues with raids and dungeoning and gearing, I think what they're saying is that there's nothing that I want to strive to put myself out of my comfort zone for. There's no reason for me to get a higher gear level because I can clear all the content I can do or that I need to do with my current level of effort. I think that nobody wants to put in extra time than they're willing to do. Like for example, when I was doing classic WoW, I think I had that renewed energy to go back and to do whether it was Molten Core, whether it was Nax, whether it was AQ. It didn't matter, because it was something that, a challenge I wanted to beat because I didn't get to originally. So it's like that was something like I would spend extra hours farming, and I would do more than I would previously be willing to do. I would log in on my phone just to make sure I got in my time, or I would make sure I make enough money so I could get my buffs. So I think that right now, in current state of WoW, there's not really anything people desire to strive for or put themselves out of their comfort zone. And I think that's where a lot of older players sort of exist in this limbo of, I don't want to do beyond what I need to do, and I don't care because there's nothing really necessarily to care for. I think right now, yes, you can have greater gear, and this is a problem that's happening, or at least I've heard in Diablo space, is like, if I'm able to clear the content I want to do in my current state, and I haven't had to leave my comfort zone, why should I want to? And so I think that a lot of times that's where kind of people start to dwindle on like just really caring about things. And so you know, a lot of like I've said, like, you know, when I view my audience reach, you know, it's mostly people in mid-20s to maybe late 30s, I think is like the max. And I think that a lot of these people want something to shoot for, but there's really not something there for them to like desire. There's nothing exciting or just jarring and getting you out there. So that's how I feel about that. And you know, going back into should we have content that isn't timed? I looked at this comment, so we were discussing this in our Discord today. One of our problems with the delves giving such good loot is that now you have tons of players in the Mythic Plus pool who have the gear that is appropriate for Mythic Plus, but nothing else. No knowledge, no nothing of the group mechanics. The pro solution is to turn delves into proper rift system from Diablo and add leaderboards. The max eye level on rewards that you can use other facets of the game is 603 and tier 8. Like this got downvoted. This got downvoted, and I think the reason why is because people don't like the idea of trying to muddy the transition between delves, mythics, and raids, because people in mythics don't want people who only do delves in their mythics, and people in raids or who focus on raid content kind of blend well with mythics because it's similar in mechanics, but ultimately they dislike each other too, because the pacing of mythics and the pacing of raids, when you have mythic players in raids, these are people who leave them the moment there's any strife, or the moment they don't get the piece of gear. They don't stick out on a raid. I remember doing raids back in Wrath where we would like stop on horsemen, and then we would come back a couple days later and reattack it, you know, or the day later and reattack it. That never happens. It never happens nowadays. Like, you never see that happen. So I think that people want to stay in their certain areas, but they also don't want people joining their certain areas as well. You have these very divided sections of the game that all can succeed doing their thing, and I don't think that's what's best for the game. I think that the delves experience, the mythics experience, the raiding experience should want to transition into each other. One of my favorite things about the dungeon experience currently is that, for the most part, they've always maintained that, you know, whenever you're doing a boss mechanic, you're gonna see it in some of the harder mobs that you face up until that point, and that to me introduces somebody naturally into the game what you're supposed to do. And if they did that more, then you could have more people wanting to do mythics from delves. But I think that people think that, you know, the people coming from delves and wanting to do harder content, even harder than what they're doing, because delves ultimately are easy. Once they come into mythics, then they go like, hey, this is not like that at all. Like, you're not able to just, you know, just smash your buttons. Like, you got to do something, and not just for yourself, but also other people. So I think that it needs to be better. Delves need to be better in introducing people to mythics before they jump into mythics, and mythics and raiding to me should just always stay separate. But coming up to mythics, coming up to raids, and why I think raids are the most connected to the mega dungeon experience, because I think mega dungeons got us used to, you stick with people to the end because it's a whole journey, and it's like the closest you can get to like a Dungeons and Dragons experience, going from like doing the entirety of Blackrock Depths, so, you know, like doing the entirety of I think even Upper Blackrock Spire, you know, you could also count, or even like Dire Maul, like those are longer too. So I think we missed those days in that era of gaming because there was quest involved, there was items involved, there was so much intrigue to it, and I think that's kind of been dissipating over time. So I think that's definitely a possible thing. And so my ultimate solution for all this is that let's bring back mega dungeons. I think that mega dungeons could fix a lot of this, because it can get you used to the length of time and just like longer content. I don't even think it needs to be harder content, just diverse content that you could maybe experience on a solo level, but have a much more vast experience on a dungeon level and doing mythic dungeon levels. And then it maybe evolving into a raid in some way. I think you having these diverse dungeon content that you could apply or shift depending on who's facing it, I think would be really key. So that's my thoughts on it. You know, I mean, take it for what you will. My big question for, you know, running through this video is, if you are an older player of this game, what's the content that you're doing, or what's the content that you really want to do but you just kind of faded away from doing over time? Mine was and has always been PvP. I used to do PvP, and I just kind of faded away from it because, to me, I don't want to be like it got too complex, and there was like too much going on, but to me, really, it got too lengthy. It was just too long to do. So I mean, it's just the way it is. So, and I wish I could do raiding more. That's the other one too. I used to love raiding. I've loved raiding since like Karazhan. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. My plan with the soon future and us crossing into 500 subscribers is maybe to make a Reddit community that focuses on sharing this type of discussion content and solution based type stuff. Until the next one, I'll catch you later. Peace.